Hello, I'm here with Judith Rice-Jones. It's June 20th, 2023, and I'm happy to interview you. This is very exciting. So first of all, I'd like to find out what your first memories of First Congregational Church, United Church of Christ are.
And then when I was at UCLA, I had gone to an incredibly progressive, this is going to sound strange for Colorado Springs, Presbyterian church. It was fabulous. It was really enjoyable, all kinds of wonderful things. One of the things I learned from there, they had this program called Dinner for 12 Strangers, which I brought back some years later to First Cong, and that evolved into Dine. They also had something I have not been successful with at First Cong, is everybody had a responsibility to do at least 2 volunteer tasks over the year, and the list was endless, and so I ended up signing up for making breakfast for the choir twice during the year, because the choir sang at two services, and in between served them breakfast. So when I came back, I went to a number of Presbyterian churches expecting the same, and it was quite a shock. Probably the greatest shock was Village 7 Presbyterian Church, where the Sunday I went, they were doing a baptism, and the minister walked down the aisle holding the baby over his head and said, "Devil, this is another baby you're not going to get." And I thought, oh my God, where have I come?
Wow.
Anyway, fortunately, my minister at Colorado College was still around, a wonderful British man. And I called him, I said, "What's going on in Colorado Springs?" And so he recommended this church, which is how I happened to come in the first time. And everybody was very friendly. And it was totally different than the Presbyterian churches that I visited. So that was a positive beginning. As I said, and people were very friendly.
Great. So that's something that really impressed you, was the friendliness of the place. When did you become a member?
I think really early. I can't remember exactly the year. It would have been in the early 80s.
I see. I see. And do you remember who the minister was at the time?
I think it was Jim White.
I see. I see.
He was here for a long time.
And what else do you have? What other memories do you have of those early years? Do you have any stories you'd like to?
I have one frightening one. So I learned at this Presbyterian church about volunteering, and nobody had asked me to volunteer, but I signed up to volunteer to help with Sunday school. And at that time, our church had befriended a Korean church that didn't have a building. And so I ended up with a class. I can't remember exactly how many children there were, maybe 8, and 6 of them were Korean, and they didn't really speak English. So fortunately, we had some good instruction, and at that age, they're doing a lot of crafty things as well, but it was, really quite a challenge, an interesting challenge.
Yes.
What else from the early years? Oh, my daughter and I went to a couple of things at in the Black Forest. One that I particularly remember that was just really outstanding. I wish I could remember the name of the book. It's a couple who wrote a book, and the book is called Parenting with Peace and Justice. And it was exactly about that. And they had so many wonderful stories to tell. And one of the things they had for children, which turned out to be good for my daughter and now good for my granddaughters, was they had some really useful exercises when you get really angry. When you're really, really angry, stomp your feet. When you're really, really angry, clap your hands. So there were a lot of practical besides being outside.
That was a church-sponsored
event?
Yeah,
that was from First Cong, yeah.
Great.
And the book is still around. I still think people ought to read it. It was really good. The parents had been kind of hippies, and so they had not wanted to spend a lot of money on other things and whatnot. And then at some point they realized that their secondhand sofa and whatnot they'd gone too far the other way. And it was one of the best parenting experiences I ever had.
Great, great. Were you involved with committees or teams or small groups within the church?
Well, I'm sorry to say that early experience with teaching Sunday school sort of taught me that was maybe not a good volunteer position for me. I remember volunteering. We had an unbelievably wonderful children's education. I'm really disappointed I can't remember her name, because she was incredible, both for the Sunday school and also she organized around all of the holidays. She organized craft things that we made. I still have things that I use at Christmas and Easter that we made with her. And that was a very positive experience, working with parents and children making these decorations for various events. And actually, last I heard, she's at the other Congregational church, the one on Union. I don't know if she's still there or not. But that was a pleasant thing.
Great. And so it sounds like your daughter became involved fairly quickly, too.
Well, she became involved in church as she did in becoming a junior docent at Rockledge Ranch because of her mother, not because she, I don't know, I'm not sure that was always a choice of hers. And Ralph Everett was her, when she got confirmed, Ralph Everett was her adult, whatever they call them. And that was a very positive experience as well. So.
Right.
And then she was an angel through high school, and then much to her dismay, when she came home for college for Christmas, they were short angels, and she and a good friend of hers, Tuck, ended up being angels again. And my daughter still tells me, my head still hurts from wearing the crown.
What other things have you been involved with in the church?
I think the other probably significant one, and that's because I'm an aging hippie, was I'm trying to think what the impetus for that was. We've had for a long time efforts at the university to get involved in sustainability. And I read that other churches, and I think the Unitarians up the block, had started, they have all different names, the Green Congregation. So we started a Whole Earth Committee here at church. And I was quite excited about that because there was a lot happening nationally, sort of this awareness about paying attention to the environment. And I don't want to be overly negative, which I sometimes have a tendency to do, but we had 2 members, one of whom only one thing wanted to do was to get people to test their toilet water before they flushed it, because he was on a wastewater committee for the city, and he was all concerned about wastewater, and it just, nobody else was interested in. And then at the time we had a young architect, I think a good architect. I've seen him in art shows in town, and his whole focus was building, I always forget the name, not a crematorium, what do you call it, where you store the ashes?
Columbarium?
He had taken the time, not on anybody's request or anybody's idea, he designed a columbarium for the whole front of the new part of the church.
Oh, really?
As kind of an entrance. And it's like, that hadn't been discussed, nobody else was interested.
So that didn't come to fruition.
Well, it's just that there were a whole lot of other things, like getting people to walk or carpool, or I remember another an issue that came up at the time, and I think this is not untypical of that kind of transition period, is at the university and at Colorado College, everybody was doing recycling. And so a lot of us took the paper things from church on Sunday and we took them up to recycling, which was north of Fillmore. There was a big recycling place. And so we asked that the church change to a trash company that did recycling, and was like, oh no, we can't do that. And I was like, why can't we? Because we had a trash company that was an African American company, but they didn't do recycling. So it's those, the 2 different issues.
A dilemma.
Coming
which
together,
avenue to take.
Yeah.
Right.
So it just was not, I have to say, and it probably had something to do with my leadership, it definitely was not a success. And at the same time, at the university, we were moving forward. I won the Campus Sustainability Award in 2010, and I went to Colorado College, which was winning sustainability awards left and right, and they're the ones who started our church. It's like, why can't that happen here?
Right.
So sort of a big sense of frustration. So.
Right, I can understand that. So who do you remember especially from your early days here? Were you good friends with anyone in particular in the church, or did you have some meaningful relationships?
That's interesting because well, I don't know if I even should. So nobody I knew from the university came to church here. And at some point, some of my colleagues, and sometimes it's just for fun, sometimes it's not really serious, couldn't believe 2 things about me. 1, that I went to a church, and 2, that I subscribed to the Gazette, which, by the way, I still subscribe to. Yes, the editorial page is terrible, but it does have a lot of good local news. So it's interesting. And then over time, it was really interesting. I think there are 6 faculty, beginning with our former chancellor and really good friend of mine who's now a neighbor and president of the faculty assembly, who are now members of the church. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that our church had more visually evolved as well when we became the first church to do sacred unions and whatnot. I think that kind of awakened the community to the fact that we were not like other Colorado Springs churches. And so I think more people that I knew from the outside started coming.
So that was a very meaningful time for you when we began to perform wedding ceremonies and,
Well,
and
not just
unions, sacred
yeah, yeah.
unions.
I think just this fact that we're a little bit more progressive. I mean, I went to UCLA. I mean, I just this is not overall. This is not a very progressive city. So it was nice to be doing things that showed that people were thoughtful. And I can't remember when the Out Loud course is a whole lot later, but that was another kind of, I think, exciting moment.
Yes, yes, the formation of
Yeah.
Out Loud that was sponsored by members of our church.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
So, what do you value most about the church and the community?
this is going to sound really shallow.
That's okay.
Aspects of me that are really shallow. So when I was in grad school at UCLA, I got involved in a historic preservation that was federally funded in Pasadena. We were surveying all the bungalows, and Pasadena is famous for its bungalows. And we had classes run by architects. It was one of the most exciting things I've done in my life. It was so well done. And so we walked all around in Pasadena neighborhoods, surveying and documenting bungalows, and I got really interested in architecture at that time. And interestingly enough, Los Angeles was just sort of discovering historic preservation. They said, Los Angeles is young. We don't have anything old. We don't have anything worth preserving. And people were beginning to say, yes, you do. And so it was a really fun moment to be there, and I got really involved. And I was a part-time curator at one of the sites, and I really loved it. And so I came back here, and I appreciated Colorado College for its architecture. I didn't come here just for the architecture, believe it or not, but it is a beautiful church. It speaks to the history of our community, et cetera. Our addition, which we're not in, is an embarrassment, but anyway. So I was on the city's first historic preservation board when we had a federally funded position. Otherwise, the city would never have had it for historic preservation. And it took us a year and a half, but we got a preservation ordinance. It's very weak. It was the 25th historic preservation ordinance in the whole state of Colorado. Again, we're not a progressive city. So I love the church. I love the building. And around that time, I sort of led an effort to get the church on the National Register. And at that time, there was this history committee. And I don't know, you all are young too, but we had a woman in the church who was second or third generation of her family. And she lived in a house on Nevada, and she was the third generation of her family to live in that house. It eventually became, after she died, it became the headquarters for the Colorado Springs Foundation. So we had a meeting about getting on the National Register at their house, and it was like being in a museum. It's really too bad that wasn't photographed. I wish I could remember her name. I'm spoiling the story by not remembering her name. So we talked about what was involved in getting on the National Register, that there were federal funds, what we could do with it. But I made the ultimate error. I said we had just done a project with the city on getting photographs of historic buildings, and the photographs had been taken, I'm going to spoil this story now, by who's our famous local photographer? Oh.
Myron Wood.
Myron Wood. God bless you. God, thank you.
Myron Wood.
That's what I was grasping for. Myron Wood. And I said, Myron Wood just did these wonderful photographs for us. We had a display in the Pioneer Museum, and we can get him to do the pictures. Well, I could have raised a red flag. These two elderly women who were from this family, they said, Myron Wood, the one who had 5 wives, you want him to,
Oh,
and
dear.
I thought that just killed it, because they were influential. I mean, they were really nice women, and it wasn't that. But it was just a total disaster, and so that just kind of killed it. But that was,
oh my gosh,
I don't know. It was interesting, and then fortunately other people picked it up, and we did actually get some federal funds, and we did get it on the National Register. But that is significant for the history. It says a lot. It reflects a lot that the Congregational church started Colorado College. That tie that was broken within a decade, and whatnot, and it's a fine example. Not that everybody loves it, but it's a fine example of architecture. Anyway, that was a noteworthy moment for me.
Right. All right. Can you think of other things that you love about this church?
Well, now I have a lot of friends in the church. The sermons are generally good. When we've had the interim ministers, I love the woman who came from outside of Turkey.
Oh, Nayiri.
Nayiri, yes.
Yes.
And I also loved Longbottom. They were
Longbottom.
They were delightful. So less enthusiastic about one of the other ones who was here for a while. So
Right. So, I guess, what advice do you have to give our congregation moving forward in the next 150 years? Do you have anything you'd like to say about that?
I think this experience I had at this Presbyterian church in Westwood was really positive. They just said, we want you to be full members of the church, and we just ask, and they had an incredible array of things you could do, from pulling weeds to whatever. And we just ask that you volunteer, 2 times during the year, and we'll call, and if it's not inconvenient, we'll call you another time, or if you want to signal the kinds of things. And I just had a blast with these twice. I don't know if I did other things, but those were the ones I committed to, of making breakfast for the choir between services. And it got people involved, and it also, I think, gave an idea of the range of things that needed to be done, that if we had to pay for all that stuff to be done would have cost a lot. And then in the process of doing those things, you also met other people who were doing them with you that you might not have met otherwise. And we also had a lot of faculty from UCLA who were members of the church, and I remember one of them had done a real fun study with some of his students, and they'd come. I don't think we had that technology then, but they'd observed where people sat, and they showed these patterns of where people sat and tended to always sit in the same places, which was kind of interesting.
So you'd like to see every member more involved with volunteering in some sort of way?
Well, I think it gives them an opportunity, first of all, to see the range of things that need to be done, and secondly, to meet people that they might not normally meet if they always sit in the same place, which I did for a long time. All the people who also sit in the same place around you, but if you move out a little bit, you meet other people. And of course, things like the magical, the tradition of Christmas. I think traditions, and along with historic architecture, help give you a sense of place, which I think is a valuable kind of attachment tool. I don't know. And I think it's. I'm kind of proud, being a aging hippie. I'm kind of proud that we're known for our social progressiveness. I've had many conversations with Joe Pickle, being a CC alum, about especially after this failure of our Whole Earth Committee, and he's very grandfatherly, and he said, no, it's not you. It's our whole church thinks of ourselves as being really socially progressive, which we are. And they don't realize that just because they're socially progressive, they're not at all environmentally in the environmental form. And so that made me feel a little bit better. It wasn't just my total failure.
Right. Do you have hopes for the creation justice?
I have huge hopes because Jan is so well organized, such a great leader.
Jan Erickson,
has already done so much. And I went to the meeting in Denver via Zoom, but that also, to see what other churches were doing, was very inspirational as well.
So you have hopes that maybe you'll see more environmental activism and awareness and
I have to say,
movement in that direction.
As a mother and a grandmother and the former advocacy chair for the League of Women Voters, if we don't do something soon, we're done, and my grandkids are done. I mean, the temperature of the ocean has gone way up, which we're anticipating. Our weather's, totally disarray. And I just can't believe, because that's probably, aside from my family and my garden and my aging dog, that's what obsesses me the most, that we're not doing anything about climate change.
It's climate change or climate collapse, as some people are calling it.
It's a real threat. So,
right. So. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us?
Well, I took some notes, of course, if I put my glasses on.
Or your experience here, or...
So, I think I keep coming back to this opportunity to work with people who aren't people that you already know, which I think has a lot. And then, I know, I've been on the Adult Forum Committee for a number of years.
That's what Ardith. I thought you would mention was the forum.
Was Ardith, and that's been really good. And now that I can stop to think about it, when I've sent people the link to Adult Forum, because a lot of them have relevance to things that we're doing with the League of Women Voters or other groups, I realized that there's no transcript of those either, although there is technology that would allow you. We have that at the university. We should maybe investigate that at some point. That might be
transcripts of the forum presentations.
There's technology. I've done some work with the Pioneers Museum on listening to the transcript and reading the transcript that was done by a computer and try and correct a few things that might have gotten missed. But I think you can read something so much faster than you can listen to it, and you can get an idea of the gist. And if there's some part that you want to then go back and view and hear the tone or something like that, you can do it. But the time it would take to go back and listen to all the adult forums.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
just so I guess I'm making a plea for thinking. And you don't have to do the transcripts by hand. There's really good technology. They have it, CC and UCCS. You can come up and see how it works. That give a good view of how
So
it works.
your experience in the forum has been very interesting for you.
It has, because the topics have generally been really interesting for me.
Yes.
So I sort of just one. So I can't remember his name. He lives up in the mountains now. He's a retired CC professor. Somebody else remember his name. He talked about Lent, and I remember he said, "What should be the symbol? Should it be the cross or the fish?" And it was really good. And in the process of talking about how over the church's history, both of these symbols had been important, and he just mentioned, I think casually, that it wasn't until the 4th century in Great Britain that we have text that shows that they were starting to talk about Lent, and just raised my hand. I said, "I know why." And they said, "It looks like me. Who are you, and why? How do you know?" And I said, "Because when you get to the period of Lent, what is that? Look at the agricultural year. That's where the food that you put away in the fall for the winter is running out, and you haven't planted the seeds for spring, and there's hardly any food." So I said that was a brilliant move on the part of the church to say, we're going to worship by doing without for 40 days and 40 nights, and then we will celebrate when Easter comes. And that's when we can replant the seeds and have food again. I mean, to me, it was such a wonderful, I'm not sure he bought it, but he
That's
talked to me afterwards.
fascinating.
He
I've
said,
never heard that.
He said,
That's
well,
very
neither
interesting.
had he, and I'm not sure he accepted it. but as someone whose one major interest is gardening and food and agriculture and local food, that is the whole life cycle that our forebears went through. Food was plentiful, and then it wasn't. Then you got to wait it again and hope for a good season. So yeah, I know those highs and lows. But I'm really disappointed that I wasn't successful in getting a volunteer project. I can't remember who exactly I talked to. They said, "Well, we'd have to hire somebody," and I said, "Oh no."
A volunteer project for what?
Volunteer to coordinate volunteers. First of all, you have to list all the projects.
Right.
Then you have to have a list of all the members, and you have to say, called her, called him, he's coming, they can't come.
Right. It's a big job.
It is a big job. So I didn't get anywhere with that.
So anything else you want to share?
Not that I can think of anything. I wish if somebody gives us a massive amount of money, we would do something architecturally with the addition. And then I have to say that for me, I don't know if you all remember Dwight Jensen, who was a member of our church. I can't remember his partner's name. But I did some stuff with him with the roses that are on the east side of the church. And he and his partner are both Rosarians. And so I told them that in my yard, I try to have mostly native plants, and then I have a lot of edible plants. And I didn't really know if there were any native roses, and he did some research and got that for me. And I didn't really get to know him. He died suddenly. That was kind of a shame. But I also, as a gardener, the outside of our church is really dismaying to me. But those things come and go as different people get interested and have time to work on them. And So anyway. And we do have this great association with the McAllister House and my herb group, Front Range Herb Society. We take care of the herb garden over at McAllister, so that's been a nice, and also Eric Metzger, who's the first really well-trained director that they have over there, has also now become the president of the Historic Preservation Alliance, which I helped found about 25 years ago. So it's nice to see these things coming together. And if the gardening from there and the gardeners from here come together and do something about our landscape, it'll be perfect.
Great.
With more volunteers.
Great.
So.
Well, thank you so
You're welcome.
much.
You're
This
welcome.
has
You're
been
welcome.
great.
You're welcome.
Appreciate
You're
it,
welcome.
Judith.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.